What is going on, YouTube people? Neo Cards and Comics here. Today, looking at something a little bit different than what we usually focus on the channel, which is modern, ultra modern. Wanted to kind of venture back, and I had talked about on the Sunday video looking at to see how vintage is holding up, and this kind of morphed from vintage per se into iconic cards of non-active players. The reason I state it that way is that I went into some cards from the 70s and 80s, and I don't, vintage, pre-war, post-war, where does it all, the different ages, all that nonsensical stuff. Basically, I just wanted to look at some GOAT players from across different generations. Now, some of the stuff that we looked at would definitely be considered vintage. Some of the stuff like a Jerry Rice rookie per se, is that considered vintage? I don't know. I don't really think it is, but I don't know. It's a non-active GOAT. So iconic cards is what we're going to look at today. And what I was curious about was, as we're all well aware, modern, ultra modern stuff has been slowly trending down, mostly because a lot of it still was super overinflated from back in early 2021, and also just general world events outside of the hobby have been, not great, and causing people to sell off some stuff and get cash on hand due to inflation and a bunch of other nonsense going on in the world. So let's take a little walk down some charts and graphs for some iconic cards, and then I pulled some just generic current player iconic cards for comparison's sake. We'll look at those at the very end. And this is just kind of a thought exercise. I could have picked any number of a billion different cards for this. I went 3 in each sport, I believe 3 in each sport, and 1 hockey card, just to kind of get a feel for how things are holding up. I also went with, in a lot of these cases, especially the older stuff, and you can see it right here with the Oscar Robertson. I went with mid grades in most of these because 1, I wanted something that had a decent amount of transactions, and 2, I wanted stuff that, not everyone can afford $1,000 card. 100% get that. But I wanted stuff more in the mid end, the $1,000 to $2,000 to $3,000 card. In some cases, we'll look at things a lot higher than that. But I didn't want to go just PSA 10s only, because on a lot of these cards, they either don't exist or there's not a lot of transactions of them or whatever. So that's what we're going to run through today. We'll be using Market Movers exclusively today. Link in the description down below. If you want your own charts and graphs, you can check out the link down there. There is a coupon code and an offer for 1 month for just $1. And then you can see the differences between the various different feature sets that they have. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and dive in. First up, 1961 Fleer Oscar Robertson rookie. Absolutely iconic card. One of the best players to ever play the game. Nice Cincinnati Royals logo there. And for the purposes of all these, I went back 6 months. This is the only exception. I cut it a little bit short of 6 months because there was a really crazy outlier sale on a PSA 6 that kind of threw all the numbers off. So I wanted that off. So I just kind of cut it short. Went to January 1st. So it's still practically 6 months, only by a couple days. So, but for every other card, we're basically looking at 6 months worth of data. So PSA 6 took the biggest hit, a 40% dive from 3.7 down to 2.1. But then the PSA 5 and 4 held okay-ish, down 12, down 7. Not great, but when you compare that to some ultra modern cards and modern cards, that looks pretty darn good. If I told you that Luka was only down 10%, you'd probably be loving life right now, but that's just not the case. Moving along in basketball, I went with the iconic 80 Topps Bird Irving Johnson triple perforated card. I went PSA 8 765 on this one. Once again, wanted to kind of get all the different ranges, and once again, 6 months worth. PSA 8 down 35%. PSA 7, 6, and 5 basically holding pretty steady. Down 4, up 7, down 4. So not too bad overall there. But the higher grade definitely took a little bit of a harder hit. That's a mini trend. Not all the cards that I looked at, but a decent chunk of them did seem like the higher grades took a heavier hit than the lower grades did, probably just because it has further to fall. I'm not much of a vintage old school guy, but this actually is a card that I wouldn't mind having at some point in time, maybe in like a PSA 7 for around 1800 or something like that. That's something I would potentially look at. I always really like this card just because it has Bird and Johnson on it. You get to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I don't know that I want to get the PSA 8 territory just from price point perspective, but I wouldn't mind getting into one of these at some point in time. Next up, Jordan. Once again, not really a vintage card, but obviously iconic card. PSA 10 through 6. I got the whole gambit here. These transact often enough in a PSA 10 to get a good idea. PSA 10's down 20%. Now, the last sale was 4.8 in Market Movers. I am sure one has probably sold since then, but these stay pretty steady between 200 and 250K typically. PSA 9's down 14%. PSA 8 basically flat. PSA 7 up slightly. PSA 6 down slightly. So pretty much kind of the same story as the other stuff. The higher grades are taking a little bit of a bigger hit versus the lower to mid grades are holding a little steadier. So once again, I continue to find that kind of interesting. Let's switch sports here and move over to football with a 58 Jim Brown. Obviously, iconic card. Another one that I would not mind owning at some point in time. Ran the whole gambit here. PSA 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. Now, some of the older stuff, when you get in the lower grades, and I should have mentioned this on the Big O, eye appeal and stuff like that can swing these cards wildly. On the Jim Brown, the PSA 7 is down about 50%. PSA 6 down 12%. PSA 5, 14%. PSA 4 flat. And PSA 3 up 20%. So a little bit of that could be swung by eye appeal. Is it a bad looking copy that sold or a good looking copy that sold or presents better and all this or that? That's why you don't see charts and graphs used a lot on this stuff, because it does get a little bit tricky when you get into these lower grades. But I think you can still get a little bit of a macro look. Generally speaking, Brown stuff is trending down a little bit. I think, and once again, this is another card where we see the higher grades taking a little bit of a bigger beating than the lower grades. And I think what that probably has to do is just the lack of buyers on the upper end. Whereas when you get to the lower end, you're opening things up to a larger buyer pool. Like, a lot of people want to own a 58 Jim Brown, but a lot of people just want to own one. They don't need a PSA 6, 7, 8, 9 of that card. They just want to have one that looks halfway decent, keep it in their collection, and hang on to it for whatever reason. So I think you see more transactions on those lower end cards like that. There's just more buyers for it, so it helps keep the prices up a little bit. Now, they're probably also not going to shoot to the moon unless the market goes crazy again, but I do think that will hold value pretty well. At least that's my speculation. Football, once again, Joe Montana, 1981 Topps. I went with PSA 9 and PSA 8 here. PSA 10s just do not sell very often of this card. PSA 9 is actually up 12%. PSA 8 is actually down 16%. And this is one where there's a wild swing. Once again, I did not include 10s. 10s sell for an astronomical sum of money. 9s go for $2,200, and 8s, it drops way off to $375. And like I said, that one's trending down a little bit. A huge pop count on the 8 at 8,000, with PSA 9s just being under 2,000. And I believe 10s in this card are pretty low. So that one holding pretty good, actually up slightly, at least in the PSA 9. Jerry Rice, rinse, repeat. PSA 9 has a pop of about 1,000. PSA 8 has a pop of almost 13,000. And PSA 10s on this are extremely expensive. The 9 has stayed flat at 1%. The 8 is down about 25%. Once again, these cards in this 1 to 2K range seem to be holding value pretty strong, even in a relatively down market. It seems to be a nice sweet spot for this stuff, at least for parking money. Once again, you're not seeing huge increases, but you're also not getting hammered like a lot of this other stuff is. Switching over to baseball. 54 Topps, Hank Aaron. We have a 7, a 6, a 5, and a 4. This one, mostly green. The 7's up ever so slightly. That's a pretty big card, though, at 17,000. The 6 is down about 12%. The 5 is up 12%. And the 4 is up 12%. So 54 Topps, Hank Aaron, absolutely iconic card, is actually holding up pretty well. And in general, vintage baseball usually tends to hold the longest and the best of all the sports. A little bit of a curveball here, no pun intended. Nolan Ryan, 1969 Topps. I know 68 is considered a true rookie, but this is his first standalone card that's not shared with someone else. I went with PSA 8 and PSA 7 here. Actually up a lot on this one. This was the best performing card of the bunch. The PSA 8 is up 26%, and the PSA 7 is up 37%. And a pretty nice value, almost $800 for a PSA 7 of this. Once again, very iconic card with Nolan Ryan in his first standalone in the 69 Topps. Next up, the GOAT of GOATs when it comes to stolen bases and quotes, Rickey Henderson. Here I went with the 9, the 8, and the 7. The mythical 10 I did not include on this one. It's extremely low pop. Allow the tinfoil hat brigade to go wild on how this is the most pop controlled card in history, which, to be fair to the tinfoil hat brigade, when you look at the numbers on this one, it is pretty ridiculous. PSA 9 pop 2K, PSA 8 it explodes to 11,000, and then PSA 7 it goes to 6.5. PSA 9's doing up just under 2K, down 7%. PSA 8's down 20%, and then PSA 7's down or up 14%. But that gets pretty, entry level there at $200 and $140, depending on what you're doing. If I was getting into one of these, it would probably be a PSA 9, and that has slid down a little bit, but not too terribly. One of the toughest PSA 10s out there. Speaking of impossible PSA 10s, and the one hockey card that we included, 1979 Opc Wayne Gretzky, one of the most iconic cards, just full stop period, regardless of sport. I went with 7, 6, and 5 in this one. PSA 7 is flat, down 1% at 6,600. PSA 6 also flat, and PSA 5 down slightly, 20% to 2,500. But once again, on those lower grades, got to be a little careful with how that balances out. Now, to contrast this, I also looked at 3 iconic modern-ish cards, still active players. And I just went with base cards here to not get things too crazy. Giannis PSA 10 and 9, LeBron Topps Chrome 2003 PSA 10 and 9, and Mike Trout 2011 PSA 10 and PSA 9. And when you run across the board here, lots of red. Giannis down 20% in a 10, LeBron down 33% in a 10, and Trout down 25% in a 10. And Trout's actually having a pretty good year. LeBron stuff's been getting hammered the last few months. And Giannis stuff has been starting to dip since he got eliminated from the playoffs. So as you can see there, lots of red. For comparable price points, you're talking $2,000 for a Mike Trout, or $7,500 for a LeBron, or $1,300 for a Giannis. If you get back into some of this other stuff here, you can have some interesting debates on where you'd rather stick money or where you think things will hold value better than this stuff. So once again, the older iconic cards, they're no longer in the league. They can't get hurt. They can't screw up. Their legacy is already set, so prices are way less swingy and way safer, which, I'm not breaking any news here. To me, the most interesting takeaway of this was that the lower to mid grades seem to be holding a little bit better than the high grades, probably because they didn't get quite as overinflated, and it's just a more transacted market. So you have more comps to compare against and, kick in some high appeal and whatnot on it. So never been my thing to chase a lot of these cards. Like I said, there are a few on that list that I wouldn't mind taking a run at some point in time that I would not mind owning. For me, when it comes to stuff like that, I usually look at comic books for that sort of thing. And that's how I treat the comic book market, looking at silver, copper, and Bronze Age keys, which would be very comparable, as we have done in previous videos, comparing those types of comic books versus those types of cards and how they compare against each other, and was actually pretty close in regards to how those hold up. So hope this was interesting. Hope a little bit of a takeaway there. Once again, just not something we typically look at, but I was just genuinely curious on how that stuff was holding up. So I figured, let's make a video about it. That's all I got for you guys and girls today. Like, comment, subscribe, and we'll catch you on the next one. Peace.